Remember, a customer, it's always cheaper to focus on retention than acquiring new customers.
Yeah, what I'm curious about is that with such a strong tool set that helps you to accelerate the effect of Flywheel Model.
The Synaptic brings in neuroscience, it brings AI, and it brings biomarkers to give you protocols to optimize for performance. Yeah, so this was a fascinating study, and I'm super grateful that so many extremely busy people took the time to speak to us. And we can't be on the fence anymore in 2025.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Curiosity Code Podcast. My name is Alex, I'm founder of Productera, and today we have Mirela Hunter, a three-time founder, consultant, and speaker who specializes in AI-enabled profit acceleration strategies. Currently, she's a founder and fractional CEO activating profit accelerating strategies for Series A to C SaaS, health tech, and biotech companies. Mirela's expertise spans across technology, venture capital, fintech, SaaS, and health tech. Before advising, Mariela held executive positions at Huntington National Bank and Citizen Bank. She has spent the last 18 months immersing into neuroscience, figuring out how to optimize brain performance, and we'll be talking about all of that on this show. Welcome, Mariela.
Hello, Alex. Delighted to be here.
Well, you have quite interesting background. Let's start with that. Tell us what you involved in currently, what inspired you to make the transition to neurotech and big brain performance. How does your background in fintech and financial services connect this transition? I'm so curious to hear your story.
Not straightforward, is it? How you go from financial services to neurotech? Yeah, so I would just say the absolute summary, the TLDR, is I've been at the crux of corporate and startup between the two. So I did start as an entrepreneur. I launched my first company when I was 21. We had an exit within 3 years. And then I was persuaded to go into corporate under the disguise that I was going still to be an entrepreneur, what is called an entrepreneur in the corporate space. So I joined Omnicom. It has a subsidiary called Rapp Collins. Mm-hmm. And there I created a new company called Say Solutions. So the difference between being a corporate and an entrepreneur is, yes, you're starting a business within the structure of a corporate, and you don't have to raise funding because the corporate is giving you all the funding to do it. Catch for any founder that is looking at this, if they want autonomy and freedom, watch it. You're not going to get it. You still have to ask permission for everything. So, but yeah, that's how I got the leap into corporate. And then when I did the MBA, I had a niche to move into alternative energies because my dad comes from the traditional, the not so pretty side of oil and gas. And I felt like my entire life was funded by oil and gas. All my education is like, okay, now I need to offset. So I used that to move into Shell, into alternative energies, which was fantastic. And there I had also the opportunity to see the entire evolution of the alternative energy space from a space where nobody really cared anything about renewable energy or carbon capture or anything that has to do with sustainability, to what it is today. In terms of the size of the business and scale. So that was good. And then I moved to Scotland, which took me into the world of financial services and fintech. And then, yeah, as you mentioned, I worked in the UK, I worked in the US, always in the space of innovation, corporate ventures, launching new products, expansions. And it was my experience with the US healthcare system in the US while I was in these roles that led me into the neurotech space. That's an entire episode if you want to go into health tech, particularly the US healthcare system. I could talk for hours of, why it leads you down a path where you have to take matters into your own hands. And that's what I did.
Let's talk about something called Flywheel Model. And you emphasize a lot flywheels over funnels and business growth. Can you break down for the audience what the flywheel business model is and why it's more effective than funnels in fintech and financial services, especially?
Yeah, the case for the flywheels is that starting a business has never been easier. However, client retention is getting more challenging every year. And that's because trust is at an all-time low. There's far too much competition. There's choice overwhelm. And from a business perspective, you can't rely on Meta ads. You can't rely on Google ads anymore. That's an expensive and not so reliable strategy. Mm-hmm. So the problem with funnels is that there's a lot of momentum at the top. If you imagine the funnel, a lot of momentum at the top, marketing, sales, the entire effort is on customer acquisition. All the goals, typically revenue goals, sales goals, targeting towards the acquisition. So you have all the energy of the organization going to that moment, and you have monthly budget, you have quarterly budget that you have to hit. And so all the effort is there on the customer acquisition. And then what happens is as the customers move into, now they're customers and into retention space, the momentum is completely lost. Mm-hmm. And so the customer becomes an event as opposed to this perpetuity, this value in perpetuity that you have to focus on. Yeah. And so when you lose momentum at the bottom, what typically happens is you're spending money, resources, ads, etc. on the acquisition. And then towards the end, you have the churn. I worked for, just to bring this to life, one of the companies in my portfolio was a SaaS company. Mm-hmm. And the CMO, who had a sort of SDR team, and then the CFO, when I asked them about the entire customer retention strategy, they didn't see them as part of their responsibility. Particularly the CMO didn't see customer retention as their part of their scope. And I thought that is absolutely fascinating. Why wouldn't you? And then when I asked them, well, who's responsible for customer retention? And they said, well, it should be customer support. Customer support. Yeah, when customers complain, it's like, you shouldn't let it get to a complaint stage. They're already ready to leave. And so this happens quite a lot where it's all about the top of the funnel and then you lose momentum at the bottom. When you move into a customer flywheel, the customer is right bang in the middle. And you have three primary activities. You have customer acquisition, of course. You have engagement, and then you have delight. So that's the circle of the flywheel. And from the moment you start to plan out a customer acquisition strategy, you're already thinking about retention. You're already thinking about delight. So you're not thinking about this linear process. You're thinking about the full value, thinking about LTV as opposed to just the CAC at the start and just the customer acquisition. And so the flywheel is now addressing all the components together, the attraction, the engagement, and the delight in a very cohesive way. So it turns this sort of linear into the circular, and each aspect fuels each other. And where it becomes really exciting is with AI and data, because each time you fine tune and you optimize the model for acquisition, and then you know what's happening with retention, and you have the data to show you, okay, which customers are staying, which ones are leaving, and why, and you have all the insight that feeds back into the funnel. And so if you know that you might have techniques or tactics on the acquisition stage that are causing customers to churn further down, then address them in the next campaign or the next time you're going to acquire customers. And so it just feeds and perpetuates that sort of cycle. So you're not just attracting, you're engaging and you're delighting customers along the way.
Is this model getting more common in the industry? What kind of trend do you see there?
I think it's getting traction is understood, but there's a big difference between understanding, practice, and then implementation. And one of the reasons that the implementation is challenging is because many companies work with external suppliers that are, so let's say you have an agency that is managing your ad your ad management,
Yeah.
they only care about your ads. They only care about conversion. They don't really care about what's happening with your retention. And equally, you have goals. Incentives is everything. So it's almost tell me your incentive structure, and I'll tell you exactly how your customer experience and performance metrics are going to work out. And so all of the performance metrics, the incentives are aligned towards the sales aspect of it, and not necessarily towards the retention or LTV of the customers. So there's always that disconnect. And unless the incentives are changed, these things don't just move by themselves. You could well have the CEO saying this is the way they want to operate, but if the incentives are not changed, then typically the process will not change and people will not change the way of doing things. And you have to remember this is almost institutional knowledge. People have worked for many companies and they bring this with them. And this is the way they know how to operate. And so it's very challenging to move of years of doing things in a specific way to move towards this sort of process, which is not just how you manage customers, but it's also a mindset.
Right. So it's a mindset challenge, historical challenge. What's the role of AI in all of this? Like, does it help to accelerate the effect of Flywheel if it's implemented successfully, or it has a different effect on this model, on the process? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think AI makes it even more exciting because you have very quick experimentation at the start. So when it comes to your customer acquisition strategies, even before you start running your campaigns, you can start experimenting with different ads. You can do A/B testing. You can use real data. You can use synthetic data, and start to optimize before it even goes live. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is you can use your existing customer data to test it. You can use your existing survey data to identify if a new product or a new feature, something new, is likely going to appeal to customers because now you have all the data, or you can even use synthetic data if for any reason you can't use customer data for regulatory purposes or anything else. You can always go with synthetic data. So that gives you the possibility to experiment, to test, learn, to make, if you have to optimize outside of a real production environment. That's one. Then you have data-driven insights. So instead of running something and then waiting to see the results, now you have the ability to use the ML, if you're using ML or if you're using an agent, to test the efficiency of the model or the agent against your original baseline. And what I mean by that is you're already doing all these processes anyway. You have people, you have teams. So run it with the agent and then compare results. By default, the agent has to do better. Okay, so you set the standard and you give it the data, and then now the agent can learn and you can give it parameters so it can get better than whatever your baseline is. You can also start optimizing using automation. So you can have AI systems that can automatically adjust and optimize processes based on data, creating a self-improving cycle. So this can now you have self-reinforced learning, which can always, it means that every time there's an error, every time something is changed or a variable is changed in the model, it learns and it continues to optimize. So lots of examples of things that you can do with, for instance, with transactional data. Another advantage is personalization has been done for decades. Everybody's doing some level of personalization. But I don't just mean taking the example of a Netflix personalization type and bringing it into banking. It's everything. It's like the name with one of the companies, they're filming the relationship manager films himself once, okay, using his AI avatar. And now the model gives him the monthly report for each customer. And so instead of getting a report by email, it's him in a video telling the customer in a very personalized way, oh, hey, Alex, this is your last month of performance. There's a few highlights for you in a very catchy, engaging video. And instead of reading the text, it's like a 60-second video report of the person. The thing is, he never did it for, 60 customers. It was just all AI generated, of course. So that leads to a whole new level of personalization, scaling the personalization ways that couldn't be done before. And of course, there's predictive analytics. And this is now not just around the customer, but I'm now taking it to a little bit on the back, things like product, finance, strategy. You can now anticipate things before they happen. In the product space, you can now start looking at the next set of features, next set of improvements, just based on what behaviors you're seeing in customers, or you're maybe even outside in the market. You can start using that predictive data in order to anticipate your next move.
Yeah, what I'm curious about is that with such a strong tool set that helps you to accelerate the effect of a flywheel model, I assume it will help with adoption as well, and kind of help to overcome those obstacles in terms of the cultural thinking and how people used to think about the funnels and the whole process of acquiring and keeping the clients. Do you think it's helping in terms of adoption, or not much?
Absolutely, but it has to be two things. It has to come from the top. Okay, so the typical leaders around customer experience, in some cases marketing, they get it. They're already embracing it. But if it doesn't come from the CEO that this needs to be done, then you're always going to have contradiction, and then it just takes much longer, because these are things that need to be implemented enterprise-wide. And what I mean enterprise-wide is, for this to be successful, you're going to need ops. You're going to need the tech team to play along. And so it has to be a cohesive effort in the enterprise to organize around the customer. The other key thing is, if you are shifting towards from a traditional funnel into a flywheel, you have to prove results quickly, but also sustainably. And you have to understand the key KPIs. You have to track them, and you have to make the case with data. You can't just say, this is a problem I see. When you talk about these things in a theoretic way, it all sounds nice. Oh, we're relying around the customer. And everybody says, yeah, well done. We've heard that 100 times before. It's now about the data. You have to show not just that you are acquiring customers effectively. You have to also show that your CSAT, or your customer retention scores, are getting better. You have to show that less customers are calling in or solving, using the contact center resources, or sending in queries or complaining, because you're managing things well. That all takes out cost of the company, but also it means you're less likely to get into churn. And then, of course, there's the churn data. And it's amazing how many people don't associate churn with the whole kind of customer acquisition as something of an afterthought. Oh, there's the complaints department over there, sitting over there, dealing with all these things. No, you should have, if you had the data from the complaints, maybe you could have done the acquisition different. Maybe you could have, changed these aspects of the product. You could have changed these aspects of the survey. If you put it in this sort of flywheel structure, it all feeds each other. And so it's very intuitive, it's understood. But the execution, as I said, two things. Prove it with data, because the most skeptic people, they will only shift if they can see that this leads to a better outcome. So they have to see it, get the CEO support. And then I was going to say a third point. I lost it. It might come later. A very critical one, and I just lost.
Now, before we switch over to neurotech and human capital, I want to spend a bit of time talking about vertical integrations, because you have such an extensive background in corporate ventures, building AI-driven business transformations. In your opinion, what are the most promising fintech vertical integrations that can grow exponentially with AI?
Yeah, I'll say two things about vertical integrations before we dive into the question. I'll make it specific to fintech. So
Hmm.
the first thing is that vertical integration can unlock such tremendous amount of value. And I say this for any company, but in fintech in particular. But it only works if it plays to the strength of that fintech or the bank, depending on who your audience is. And the second key point is I want to kill the belief that an FS or fintech vertical integration is about proprietary assets, which does apply in tech. So you see it, perfect example, Apple is now producing its own chips. You have the full vertical integration, devices, stores, everything is integrated. But when it comes to financial services, this is about partnerships. Partnerships is how you win. Okay, so on the first point, if your audience here is running a fintech or a bank, just to bring as an example, if your unique advantage is, let's say, cross-border payments and FX, and this is what you're really good at, then it makes sense for you to look at a vertical, let's say, around global logistics. I'm just giving an example here, because those two capabilities go hand in hand. But you're not going to become a global logistics player. You're going to make the leap from a bank or a fintech into a global logistics player. Okay.
Yeah.
So the key is to get that partnership and own it. So now you're aligning your resources, you're aligning your capabilities to being the best fintech bank when it comes to global logistics. You already have the core capability, you have the assets, and now you can continue to build on that. And then you position yourself to own that vertical through the right partnerships. So you won't own full distribution, but now you're bringing all the big clients in because you've now aligned your capabilities to that vertical. And so I did an analysis for a major card company of all the different verticals that they could expand into. And to be transparent, they were already pretty much in every vertical, with opportunities that were identified for additional scope, which I won't go into right now because they were very specific. But there was one that I found completely fascinating, which was in the ad tech space. Because when you look at budgets of enterprises and the companies in the VC portfolio, the one thing that seems to get untouched is the ad budget. Okay, but when it comes to the ad spend, the insights between, if you think about the financial reporting and also the financial management, which what's happening in ads, it's almost like do the ads and then eventually it turns out into financials.
Yeah.
But there's nobody playing in the middle, which is such a massive opportunity to bring the two together. And the technology in ads is advancing so quickly when it comes to the platforms that are bringing all the different, organic channels, social channels, programmatic, etc., all together into a platform. And now you're putting finance right in the middle. And I'm not just saying payments. Payments is the obvious use case, but you can use things like the fraud detection. You can use dynamic pricing. You can use the personalized financial advertising. So there's quite a few interesting things that you could do. NerdWallet, for instance, uses AI to match users with personalized financial product recommendations. So that's just one example. And in fraud, I know Adyen is using AI to monitor transactions and prevent fraud as well. So you can embed these capabilities within the ad tech space to unlock even further spend, but also more insights that then link into the financials. So I think that is a really good sweet spot for folks. If you have capabilities in that space or potential for partnerships, I think it's going to be super exciting. The other one is massive, is health tech. Health tech in the US is 800 billion size of an industry. So it's the third biggest industry in the US. It's about 16% of US's GDP. And if you think about financial services, your financial life and your transactions is one of the most intimate things in terms of data that anybody can see of you. If anybody could see all your transactions, it's very intimate. But healthcare is where it really gets even a whole new level of, personal in terms of taking care of your health. And if you can bring the two together, I'm not just talking in the personal space, but also corporate space with the healthcare providers, is enormous. So the biggest use case you see some of the larger banks, JP Morgan and others, positioning themselves really well in the payment space, of course, streamlining healthcare payments for the healthcare providers and insurance. But you can also start looking at solutions to automate underwriting, risk assessments, payment processing, etc. You have Oscar Health, for instance, is a health insurance company. It uses AI to offer personalized healthcare plans and payment options. So that is just one example. We spoke also about predictive analytics before in the context of the flywheel. So again, you can use predictive analytics to analyze patient data, to analyze trends in healthcare by region, by types of sectors. You could even look at if most of my, like I said, my previous example, if my vertical is in the logistics space, but let's say you were in a different space, then what does that mean in terms of trends that you could see for types of claims, for types of level of transactions, and how can you start optimizing to deliver more personalized service or help the healthcare provider within their work stream, their workflows, and also integrate that into the payments. Healthcare cost management is not going to be very popular for the insurance providers because, of course, in their best interest that they have rising costs and also probably not the best process to optimize claim errors because it's in their interest that doesn't get addressed, unfortunately. But if you look at cases like Cigna, they have they use AI to analyze claims and identify cost-saving opportunities for their partners and also for their clients and their employees. So there's huge potential there. I think just recently I received also an email from HSBC expanding their offering on healthcare. So everything you can think about a healthcare provider, similar to Amazon also expanding into healthcare, you have it. It's almost remote services, prescriptions, everything there. So you see now banks repackaging healthcare and offering it to you. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the near future.
Let's move on to the whole discussion about brain performance, human capital, neurotech. Let's kick it off with this. So you conducted 100 plus interviews with FinTech and non-FinTech CEOs. What key insights have you gained about peak brain performance in leadership specifically?
Yeah, so this was a fascinating study, and I'm super grateful that so many extremely busy people took the time to speak to us. So what happened is I went through, as I mentioned, a very disappointing experience with the US healthcare system, in that I was going from one expert to another and feeling like I was in a conveyor belt without getting any diagnosis or any results. And that was impacting me in many ways. One of them, of course, was professional, not just because I was spending so much time in the ER, but also all the health implications. And then as I started speaking to people and realizing this, I became very curious about it. And the curiosity turned into an obsession, and I had to have answers. So the more I got answers, the more I started to see patterns, but I needed to validate them. So I said, okay, I need to take this to 100 interviews. And 100 interviews, does that give you enough validation? For me, it started to solidify the trends. And so we looked at 100 only C-suite across various sectors in the US, but mostly tech companies, included FinTech, financial services. We looked at healthcare, law firms as well, a few others, to understand how they were experiencing as a level of C-suite their overall health and cognitive performance, and what are the challenges, what they were trying, what's working. And then, of course, the question, if budget is not an issue and if you could design the perfect solution, what is that? So what we identified is, and it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts as well from your background, but when you're particularly VC backed, or you have been in a public company, there's a non-stop button. You have to keep going. You can never press pause. And that starts to have a few consequences. So the few trends that popped up was the need in health habits, the need to look at sleep and address sleep. So recognition that they were compromising sleep, very frequently sacrificed because they have a deadline, or a business dinner meeting, or just extensive travel, and travel just catches up with them, and then they say, well, we'll sleep on the weekend, but it just keeps accumulating. And the interesting on that one is they understand that there's the consequence of not sleeping, but they don't understand the impact of what it means to their brain in the long term if they don't sleep. Okay, because I don't know if it's they don't know or they choose to ignore it because it's not a convenient thing to know. Nutrition. Again, these people are extremely smart. So they know about health choices. They know what a balanced diet is. Of course, they want less sugar, but it's the lifestyle that gets in the way. It's the number of dinner meetings, as I mentioned, having to eat at the desk, ordering from for delivery from the deli, whatever's available. But it's this sort of, how do I keep my optimal energy levels through the day? Because as I said, there's nonstop. Just as you stand up at 7 a.m. and stay on stage to give a town hall, in the evening you might have an interview with media or something. You have to be sharp no matter what time of the day, but there's just an awareness of the different energy levels. Exercise. I love this one. So there was a bit of polarity and intensity, as you can expect from high performer CEOs. They lock in the times between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. for exercise, and nobody can touch that. And I include myself in that. So they will be working out early in the morning. But for others, and they're super religious about that, because they explain the level of, their performance and their success is to the rituals, and that's what other rituals. But for others, it's a bit more sporadic. It's like, yeah, I know I have to do it, but maybe they do it on the weekend or when they go on a ski holiday, and it becomes this sort of afterthought. And they just can't seem to put it in a routine when they have such busy lifestyles. And so there's just a desire to do this in a more routine basis for those of them that are not doing it already. Now, when we talked about the problems, any guesses what's the number one issue?
On the personal level or business?
When it comes, health issues is a personal thing. The main challenge they have.
Stress.
Yeah. Not surprising. So super common to have high levels of stress. Some of them do use the word burnout, others don't. But the question is, what is acceptable in terms of level of stress and for how long? And a lot of them don't know what's the difference between stress and chronic stress. Because a little stress is good. I mean, there's sort of acute stress, which is, imagine if you're driving and you have a little bit of an incident with somebody and they swear at you or something. Mm-hmm. The next 30 minutes, you forgot about it. So that's sort of just the moment it gives you a spike of cortisol and then you forget about it. But the chronic stress goes on for months, and it can sometimes go for years. And it takes a toll in your body, and they don't really understand the impact. Just as we said with sleep, it's almost seen as the price of success, or, well, I wouldn't be in this role of CEO if I didn't understand that it comes with high levels of stress. But the aspect is the key point here is, if it goes unmanaged and you have chronic stress because you're living in a perpetual state of stress, it's going to cause all sort of issues. You have high blood pressure, anxiety, depression, cognitive impairments. And this is when you say the word cognitive impairments, now they start paying attention. It can impact your memory. You can have memory loss. You can have difficulties with recall. You can have also develop other diseases like heart disease, obesity, mental health disorders like anxiety, depression. But because it's seen as a necessity, these things are either not known or ignored. So, like, you at first yourself is the first thing is the awareness, and the second thing is knowing it's happening. And some of them have the biomarkers. They'll have a whoop band or an Oura ring or something. But what to do about it and when to do something about it is what is missing here. And the typical thing is time constraints. Not only making the time, but how do they manage this and put it into their day so that they can have the right wind down or the right relaxation, restoration techniques. And the other thing, as I mentioned, is the sleep quality. Now, we think, why are we going to the FinTech to these things? Well, because cognitive performance is everything. When you're managing a company, you're a leader. It doesn't have to be in my interviews, we're only C-suite, but you can be at any level. No matter what you're doing, you're launching a product, you're expanding. If you don't have that cognitive, performance at optimal levels, the business is going to suffer. And if you have a company that doesn't have the right culture around protecting people's performance and the ability to have an opportunity to restore and give people the ability to switch off their email at some point, these things are going to continue, perpetuating. It becomes an expectation, and eventually it hinders performance. So in my book, actually, I do bring examples of the top CEOs and how they have embedded that into the culture. So it's a lot of things that are very unpopular in financial services. But no, some of the top companies are implementing these, so they can see that. So yeah, that's just a few examples of insights that came from the interviews.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely not a CEO who's running a public company, but I can totally relate to many things you outlined. And I personally take it very almost like a religiously level my morning routines. Sleep, no screen after 8 p.m. and before 7 a.m., which is hard to do, but I force myself to do that. Then morning meditations, just to keep that level of stress low. Physical activities, obviously. So totally, like pretty much everything you've mentioned, that's something that I personally went through as well. Probably not the chronic stress, though. Hopefully, I will never have that.
Good for you.
But that's interesting. Let's try to bring it back to FinTech and what you currently do. So you built AI-driven solutions, financial services, corporate strategy. Now you're in neurotech. So you're working on something called Synaptic.ai. What is it, and how is it redefining executive performance? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So in my background in corporate FinTech, energy, we build businesses. So I'm a builder. And when I start looking at a problem, and as I mentioned, this problem had been validated, I had to do something about it. That's my itch. I see the problem, it's validated. I hear it not one time, but 80 out of 100 times. I was like, okay, I have to do something about it. And the key thing is that there's an opportunity here to really impact the performance, not just of individuals and their overall health and their happiness and their overall well-being, but the corporations, if you do it at scale. And so the majority of the solutions out there, wellness programs or health coaches, are almost one-to-one or mass scale. So I'll say, hey, Alex, there's this corporate wellness program. It works for Amanda here, so it's going to work for you. Well, no. Amanda's in a very different stage of her life, different biology. Just because it works for her doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And maybe you have different objectives, different priorities in your life. So everything is either mass scale, or when it comes to the personal aspect, is delivered by a coach. Coaches is one of the things that a majority of CEOs are using. But the definition of a coach, again, is somebody who for instance, when you're hiring in your team, and you have a difficulty, or you have, your shareholders or your investors, they'll coach you around those things, but they don't coach you for your performance. And the analogy that I'm using here is, if you look at the top athletes, their coaches are with them throughout the day. They'll say, hey, Alex, we've got a big match tomorrow. They'll tell you about their opponent. They tell you about the game that you have to play. They'll prime you for your diet, so you're eating the absolute right things before your match. They will make sure you get the right sleep. They will work in your mindset, so you have a winning mindset. They work with you holistically, so there's only one outcome, and that is you're going to win. Okay? But when you take that into the corporate space, where's that? That doesn't exist. It's up to you. You leave it to chance, right? You go through your day and you book meetings, and if you still have an assistant, they'll put in meetings wherever you have spaces without the optimization, just because there was a slot there. And then ultimately you just go along with whatever is happening without really knowing what would be the tools and the insights that could absolutely maximize your success to win. If they knew, it's almost like taking a peek inside your brain and saying, what could I do? What could I optimize here? And then go out and crush it in whatever it is that you're going to do. So the Synaptic brings in neuroscience, it brings AI, and it brings biomarkers to give you protocols to optimize for performance. There's three initial protocols in the first beta. There's a protocol for focus and flow states, so you can be super zoned in. And if you get that protocol, because you have to complete first the brain health score, so it's not guaranteed you're going to get that. Depends on what answers you give to the question. If you get that protocol, then you open up your focus vault, and there you'll find priming exercises for the morning. So you mentioned you have morning meditations. So there are morning meditations, but there are also priming exercises, which include breathing to get you zoned in for the day, and the right messages to get you into that sort of performance and flow state mindset. You can also throughout the day get either Pomodoro techniques, timers. You can get music that stimulates your focus as well. So if you have headphones and you know you're about to do 1 hour of solid work, you can put the headphones on, and the music is going to help you get into that flow state. There's others, as I mentioned, stress is a big issue. So one of the protocols is around resilience. And again, these protocols are not static. You could be going through a really good phase right now of your life, and then something happens and you might feel you need to switch gears to a resistance protocol because you had an event and you want to manage through that. And there's, of course, the sleep protocol. The sleep protocol is foundational. And almost if you're not getting enough sleep, you have any signs of sleep deprivation in the quiz, that's going to become your number one protocol. And the reason for that is if you're not getting enough sleep, forget about the focus protocol. It's not going to work. Forget about being resilient against stress and overcoming challenges. If you're not getting sleep, it's not going to work. So that becomes the default. And there you see everything you get with apps like, I don't know, Calm or Headspace, sleep stories, meditation, it's all in. But it's all around proven neuroscience, protocols that you can follow, and it acts as a coach. The AI agent, it's coming in the next release, and this AI agent is going to be the equivalent of that performance coach that I mentioned before.
That's impressive product. Let's wrap it up. So I'd like to combine everything we spoke about, because such different subjects, AI, Flywheel Model, FinTech, Neurotech. In your opinion, how can startups rethink growth by combining like flywheels, AI agents, peak cognitive performance, what should they prioritize to scale efficiently in the era of AI?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to say the obvious first. Health is everything. If you don't have health, you have nothing. So start there. Flywheels, yeah. I mean, look at, there's plenty of resources on this, and you might find that your major tech providers are already using it, implementing it, or you can look at some of the effective models that have already been implemented. So have a look at that. There's plenty of good use cases of how to do that. If you're a startup and you're just getting started, now it's the time. Because if later on, if you put all the infrastructure, you now start hiring and you're trying to do the shift, it becomes harder. So look into this sooner, and you will not regret. Your future self will help you because you're going to spend less. Remember, a customer, it's always cheaper to, what's the phrase? I can't remember. It's always better to focus on retention than acquiring new customers. So
Totally, yeah.
you don't want to have that if you're still at your initial stages of the company. You want to address from the start the insights that could lead you to churn and design for a journey that minimizes churn from the get-go. In everything, even in ad campaigns. So get everybody involved, product teams, marketing teams, to think about the flywheel as opposed to the linear thing where everybody has accountabilities and people say, no, I'm just sales, I don't deal with that. Everybody's responsible. On AI, I would say that most of the startups that I know in my various networks and communities are already embracing AI or embedding it quite significantly into their tech stack, and taking even bigger leaps in the space. FinTech, financial services, as you know, which is regulated, it's a lot more challenging because you have to prove, and there's certain aspects that you have to manage with the regulator to prove that what you're doing is effective even before it goes into production. And you have to convince them as well of what you're doing. So there's a bunch of tests that you need to do to make sure that you can. So it's not as you would like with my SaaS clients. You can move a lot quicker. Any regulated industry with AI becomes a lot trickier. There's a lot of restrictions, data of customers, GDPR, and things like that. So you have to, if your internal legal teams, compliance teams are not helping you navigate, that's something absolutely you're needing to look at before you roll out. But there are different ways to start implementing things to develop traction. I mean, that's a whole episode I could do on that. But look for those value, high routine, high cost cases that you can start implementing now, where minimal customer data is required, which means it doesn't trigger, regulatory red flags. That's the space to start. There's actually, as you were asking the question, I did a flywheel in my head, which is now for the, I don't know if your audience also has bigger fintechs or even banks, but there is this sort of, with AI, well, actually, let me start before that. There has never been a time where I haven't had as many corporate execs reaching out to me. And I say this in the past 6-8 months and asking me about how do I become a fractional because they want to leave the corporate scene. And these are sort of larger companies. Something happened in this transition to go back to the office that is making a lot of people very unhappy. And they're finding out that the place of work that they're coming to is not what it used to be sort of pre-2022. Or their priorities have changed, their life has changed, and they don't feel the same way. So a lot of people, it's unbelievable how many people want to leave corporate. And I'm talking about people in really high states, but they have the fear of what's going to happen. They don't know how to go independent, or they're also looking at the job market and they're saying, well, it's not what it used to be. And so there's a lot of fear there, but also making things kind of moving the next phase is AI. a lot of the denial phase is over. And what I mean by that is, if I'm creating AI agents, let's say for procurement, and I can now completely replace your procurement team, completely, okay, because of my agents, I am not going to come to you to pitch that product. Obviously, I'm going to go to the CEO or I'm going to go to the CFO. So just because you don't hear about it, it doesn't mean it's not happening.
Right.
And just remember, markets love layoffs. Every time there's a layoff, the stock prices just shoot up. So this is happening, even if you're not hearing about it. And it's also causing a lot of anxiety. It's causing a lot of stress. But also you need to figure out a plan B. Okay, so this is where fractional comes in. Companies like fractionalshq.com. That's a solution for anybody. If this resonates and it's interesting, go and check them out. But the other thing is, back to the neurotech. If you are an exec facing a lot of stress, if your priorities have changed and you're seeing everything that is happening with AI, you're not riding the wave. People that are happy, that are, being quite successful, they're already adopting AI agents. They have done it. But if you're on the fence, you're really going to struggle. You have to embrace it and figure out how to get AI agents for the things that are almost making you an overhead. Remove that. You want to become a profit center. You want to be a source of profit. If you have anything that you do in your day that makes you more kind of overhead because you have to do these things, automate away. Bring agents. Figure out how to do that. Streamline your team, streamline your processes. You have to embrace that. We can't be on the fence anymore in 2025. And then if you are having trouble navigating this, cognitively, mentally stressed, of course, check out Synaptic.
Well, Mariela, thank you very much for your time. It's been great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Alex.
For the listeners, that's been another episode of the Curiosity Code podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if not yet and hit the like button. Thank you and see you next time. Bye-bye.